Hello everyone, my name is PJ and welcome to The Void. Don't worry, I'm not done doing video game reviews. I said I wanted to do other things and talking about Dungeons & Dragons is one of them. D&D is one of my biggest obsessions. Before I ever even played it for myself, I loved watching Unforgotten Realms and reading Order of the Stick. I first played it back when 4th edition came out, played that for about 5 years and have been playing 5th edition ever since. There were some other systems sprinkled in here and there like Pathfinder, GURPS, and even Furry Pirates, but 5e remains my favorite, and I'd love to run or play some games in the older editions sometime. For most of my D&D career, I acted as the Dungeon Master. Yes, I am a forever DM, but I've almost never run any pre-written modules. I write nearly all of my own content and love creating custom NPCs. One little project I wanted to work on was to create a PDF full of stat blocks for enemies from Dark Souls, something I would still like to do because the one that already exists made many decisions that I sorely disagree with. I mean, Ornstein and Smo have challenge ratings of 16 and 17. That's a total encounter CR of 22. A party of 4 would need to be max level to even stand a chance against them. And these two are only the adventure's halfway point. So yeah, ignoring that PDF, I still wanted to make stat blocks of the Dark Souls bosses, and I figured Ornstein would be a good place to start. But when I got around to deciding what his ability scores should be, I froze. Because I realized that even though I'm perfectly aware of what these scores do mechanically, I still have no idea what most of their ranges mean. What is the difference between an NPC with 10 intelligence and one with 11? They both have the same modifier. Ignoring most spell effects, the only ability score that gives you a benefit with every level, rather than just every other level, is Strength, since each point boosts your carrying capacity. So how is it then that the game's designers can decide whether a creature has 14 int or 15? Or 21 charisma instead of just 20? Well, that's what I decided to try and find out. There are no official guides on what each level of a score means, and I don't intend to rely on other fan-made guides, so I did all the research myself. I went through every creature in 5e, one intelligence level at a time, and made observations on how similar they are to one another, what they share in common in regards to sentience, sapience, problem-solving, and multitasking, and compiled them all. So what does the intelligence score actually do? Well, the most notable thing is that it's the primary spellcasting ability for wizards and artificers, as well as Eldritch Knight fighters and arcane trickster rogues. It's also the score that determines how high your arcana, history, investigation, nature, and religion skills are, as well as your intelligence saving throws, which, as far as I can tell, are primarily for resisting illusion spells, which don't come up often. And since they don't come up often, intelligence tends to be the go-to dump stat for every class that doesn't need it. What that tells us though is based on those skills, any NPC that has a high intelligence score is going to be one who is either a powerful spellcaster, a learned, book-smart studious type, or someone with a keen eye for details and logic, like detectives and military commanders. But what about the lower intelligence levels? Many players have argued that having 8 int doesn't make a PC stupid, and 20 int doesn't make a PC a genius. Well, I don't think PCs are a good representation of what these intelligence levels mean, because no player can play a character smarter than themselves, and anyone who tries to make a character act dumber than themselves is just screwing over their allies for the sake of, lol, it's not my fault, my character's an idiot, lol. So yeah, I'm sticking entirely to NPCs for this one. So, from 0 to 30, I'll be going through each intelligence level one at a time and giving example creatures. I'm also going to ignore most of the creatures from adventure modules since many of them are poorly thought reskins, and the rest are individuals. That's not to say I left out all individuals, but the only ones I included are those that truly stand out from the rest, like deities. Okay? Here we go. Intelligence 0. Inanimate objects, corpses, and anything incapable of thought typically has 0 int. It's possible for a living human to have 0 int if it fails its saves against an intellect devourer's devour intellect action. If this happens, the victim is permanently stunned. The smarter you are, the easier it is to resist this power, and it can't affect anything with an intelligence of 19 or higher. And these things are only CR2. If you suspect that your DM might throw one of these things at your party during the early levels, you might want to reconsider your starting ability scores. Having that one extra point in intelligence could be worth it, even if it doesn't do anything else for you. Intelligence 1. Creatures either incapable or barely capable of rational thought. Most oozes and animated objects have 1 int, but also several insects, lesser reptiles, lesser marine animals, and non-magically animated plants. Animals with 1 int also have medium wisdom scores, giving them higher self-preservation instincts than oozes and objects. No mammals are on this list, and only the lemur has an alignment due to it being a devil. Speaking of the lemur, one very interesting note about it is that even though it only has 1 intelligence, it can still understand a language. That means it can read. A creature dumber than a squirrel can read, but only Infernal. For all we know, the Infernal script is magic. Intelligence 2. Most of the game's mammals and larger reptiles are on this list, as well as some larger insects, likely due to their increased brain size. Interestingly, the ochre jelly is the only one of the 4 main ooze types to have 2 intelligence, giving it the ability to plan how it approaches or evades other creatures. Only a few creatures with 2 int have an alignment, and most are true neutral. The spell Rary's Telepathic Bond doesn't work on creatures with 2 or less intelligence, but creatures of this intellect or higher can be affected by a Myconid's rapport spores, so this level acts as a vague threshold for whether telepathy is possible or not. They also don't show up on an Intellect Devourer's Detect Sentience radar. Marine animals in this range are also automatically charmed by a kraken whose lair they're within 6 miles of. Intelligence 3. Most of the mammals that we consider to be pretty smart are on this list, like cats, dogs, and elephants, as well as variations of their genera, like wolves, panthers, and mammoths. Death dogs are on this list, and are described as having hearts filled with hate. So this seems to be the first level of int where creatures can experience strong emotions. However, constructs like the clay and stone golems and anything created by the Animate Object spell also have 3 int in order to help them understand their master's commands, but I don't think their emotions would be very strong if present at all. The Gazer, Giant Wolf Spider, Neothalid, and Tarrasque are also on this list. Whether that's adorable or terrifying, I leave to you to decide. Lastly, zombies of various types all have 3 int, which makes sense since 3 is supposed to be as low as a player race's int can go. At that point, they can still feel limited emotion and understand languages. This is the level of int where alignment becomes a lot more common, and most of the ones that have it are evil due to being fiends or undead. It's also the lowest intelligence that any non-construct can read common at, that being the Ogre Zombie. Intelligence 4. Lesser primates and smarter dinosaurs appear on this list, like the baboon and velociraptor. It's important to note that the Animal Friendship, Awaken, and Beast Bond spells will not work on these animals or any of the smarter ones. They're too intelligent to be affected by them. Guard drakes were created to serve, so it makes sense they'd be smart enough to understand languages. Varguils are former humans capable of understanding several languages, but they can't speak, being single-minded and lacking a defining personality due to their abysmal charisma. The Cranium Rat and Needle and Twig Blights are smart enough to have alignments, and they can be communicated with, but in different ways. The most interesting creature with 4 int is the Monodrone. We're going to be talking about the Modrons a lot. Perfectly capable of speaking its native language, solving problems, and thinking logically, but incapable of understanding anything said by a Modron of 9 int or higher speaking the same language. Its intellect is incredibly specific and limited. Alignments at this level are still mostly non-existent, but there are some lawful creatures and some evil creatures. It's worth noting though that there hasn't been a single good aligned creature yet. Only creatures of 4 int or higher can be detected by a Neothalids, Eulitherids, or Elderbrain's creature sense trait. Intelligence 5. Creatures created specifically to serve, like Chulls and Crawling Claws, can all understand languages, but are incapable of talking back. Most notably, the Cadaver Collector is a mute construct that understands all languages, so villains of any race that happen upon one can give it orders, but it's not smart enough to do anything other than its prime directive of collecting corpses. Typical hulking brutes like ogres and hill giants are here, both perfectly capable of speech, but more animalistic, languageless creatures like the mimic and shambling mound are also here, accentuating their natural instincts with actual stealth tactics. White dragons are the dumbest of the true dragons, so it makes sense we'd see one of their wormlings in this video first. Turns out their intelligence is equal to that of a wyvern, another dragon, as well as that of earth and water elementals, and several lesser demons like the Hezro. Almost all of the creatures with 5 int are evil, but with one notable exception: the Hippocamp. Chaotic good, and it doesn't even know any languages. It's the dumbest good-aligned creature in the game. This seems to imply that 5 int is the lowest state in which a creature is smart enough to discern between good and evil without needing to have it explained to them. Only creatures with 5 int or higher can be affected by Tasha's hideous laughter, implying that anything with less lacks a sense of humor. Intelligence 6. The most intelligent real-world animals are on this list: the ape and the dolphin. Mounts summoned by the Find Steed spell automatically gain this level of intelligence if it's not already higher. Minotaurs are on this list too, and it's worth noting that they don't lose any intellect at all upon becoming a skeleton. Speaking of which, human skeletons are on this list too. Their intellect has little to do with their ability to think or solve problems, and everything to do with their ability to wield weapons, use tools, and follow complex directions, which they follow literally and unwaveringly, though they are capable of communicating via body language. Flesh golems are similar. Higher acting creatures like displacer beasts are able to devise more cunning tactics, while Ettins and gnolls have stronger communication and social skills, though both are still lacking. Similar to the monodrone, the duodrone can understand modrons one level above and below it, but cannot understand modrons of intelligence 10 or higher. And even after reaching adolescence, white dragons are still dumber than the babies of other dragons. You might be wondering why air and fire elementals have higher intelligence than earth and water elementals. Well, the air and fire ones need to be able to use and react to their environments, such as attacking from the air or avoiding water. Earth and water have innate abilities that allow them to take advantage of their surroundings without having to think. Intelligence and evolution closely correlate. The more an environment requires a species to think in order to survive, the smarter it'll become. Once again, just about every creature on this list is evil or neutral. Intelligence 7. This is the level of intellect where we first start to see societies that aren't necessarily savage in nature. Bullywugs have a society where every member considers itself incredibly aristocratic. Ettercaps are capable of farming, and orcs and fire newts are both very religious and militaristic. Ghouls, harpies, and ropers use their intellect to better prey upon their victims, usually as a pack. Of all the mephits, Magma is considered the slowest mentally, so while they're capable of the same level of thought as the others I've mentioned, they have difficulty understanding or empathizing with others. Winterwolves and wargs may be kept as pets by other creatures, but both are capable of speaking multiple languages, including their own, and are both considered to be very cunning. Lastly, the corpse flower is described as despising all living things, meaning it can not only think and feel, but is capable of reasoning and directing its emotions towards groups rather than towards individuals. Almost all creatures of this intellect are evil. Intelligence 8. Finally, at this level of intellect, we get our first NPC template, the first creature in 5e that can actually be a functioning human, the Tribal Warrior. And it makes sense that they'd be here because many tribal pack society creatures are on this list too, like bugbears, cyclopes, kobolds, murrow, thrycreens, svarts, and yetis. Gnolls with specialties are smarter than regular gnolls, but it seems like even kobold inventors aren't any smarter than regular kobolds. Fire giants are normally creatures of average intellect, but dumber ones who aren't good at crafting but are incredibly strong become dreadnoughts. This, along with human tribal warriors, shows us how 8 int is a good gauge for members of an intelligent species who are less sophisticated. And it makes sense since 8 is as low as the standard array or point buying system will allow for PCs. White dragons, now full-grown adults, are still dumber than the babies of other dragons. Sheesh. Also on this list are the earth and water elemental myrmidons, together. So the regular elementals having the intelligence scores they did was not an accident. Air and fire are just smarter elements. Creatures of this intellect are still mostly evil, but there's more variance in neutrality, law, and chaos, and the presence of the tribal warrior, which can be any alignment, opens up the door for more good alignments. But one creature that stands out is the giant eagle, a wholly separate creature from regular eagles. These birds are neutral good, and they know multiple languages including their own. They are as smart as a variant human, drow, wood elf, dwarven, or even a halfling tribal warrior. Intelligence 9. What do you know, the air and fire elemental myrmidons are here, exactly 1 int above the others. Smarter wilderness-dwelling creatures like centaurs and frost giants are on this list, including more intelligent orc clerics. Interestingly, the Tanaruk, which is a cross between an orc and a demon, is much smarter than the average orc, even though all it wants to do is kill things and usurp the tribe that created it. Dust, ice, and mud methods are intelligent enough to all have distinctive personalities, just not deep or complex ones. Perytons and Umberhawks use their natural innate abilities to hunt and survive, so while they are quite intelligent, they're pretty high on the food chain and don't need to be any smarter than they are. Tridrones are here, and this is where Modron intellect starts to get complicated. Tridrones can understand quadrones, but they can't understand pentadrones, which have the same intellect as quadrones. That probably means Modron's inability to understand one another has little to do with their intellect and more with their language. Or it could just be the quadrones and pentadrones have different enough intellects despite having the same score. Kinda like the difference between someone with 80 IQ and someone with 85. All 3 of them are also incapable of understanding the simpler monodrones, so I blame the language. Also on this list is the NPC template for Berserkers. Interesting that they have higher intelligence than tribal warriors, no? But unlike tribal warriors, Berserkers have limited alignment choices. They can only be chaotic. I attribute their higher intelligence to more combat experience. While this list is still mostly evil, there are some good creatures, like the Centaur. Creatures with less than 10 intelligence, like all the ones we've covered so far, cannot succeed on DC 20 intelligence checks, which means they cannot solve complex mazes, as described by the Maze spell. Intelligence 10. At last we have 10, which is considered by the system to be the average humanoid intelligence, and I say humanoid because normal humans in D&D 5e actually have 11, since they get a +1 to every ability score. But commoners of Ozimar, Dwarven, Drow, Wood Elf, Halfling, Tabaxi, Turtle, and Triton descent to name a few, would just have 10 int. And it's not just commoners. Lots of NPC templates that don't rely on intellect are here, like acolytes, bandits, bards, champions, cultists, guards, thugs, and veterans. Many species are shown to have this level of intellect, like darklings, goblins, hobgoblins, which I expected to be smarter than regular goblins, but I guess not, dragon turtles, grung, pegasi, pixies, pseudo-dragons, smoke mephits, stone and fire giants, and several lycanthropes. Ghosts are here too, showing that while dead creatures can have memories magically withheld from them, they don't necessarily lose the ability to rationalize, apply, or retain information. Another interesting creature on this list is the juvenile mimic. Not only is it smarter than regular mimics, it can also speak languages and is telepathic. Also, plants given sentience by the Awaken spell have this level of intellect, yet are compelled to serve the caster that granted it to them for 1 month, after which they gain free will. The final and smartest Modrons 5e has given us so far, the Quadrone and Pentadrone are here. There are many more Modrons, but 5e hasn't given us stats for them yet. What's taking so long, wizards? The white dragon, after having lived for over half a millennium, is now finally as smart as an average humanoid, but still only as smart as the newborn hatchlings of black and brass dragons. God, white dragons are dumb. It took this long, but we're finally at a level of intelligence where good creatures are more common, and not just because of the NPC templates. There's also the Blink Dog, Brass Dragon Wormling, Pegasus, Pixie, and Pseudo Dragon. From this point forward, all alignments will be considered equally likely to occur, and I'll only bring it up if something notable happens. Intelligence 11. If human commoners get a +1 to every ability, that means almost all of them have this level of intelligence, with most variant humans being the exception. It's also the intelligence for commoners that are high elves, Gith, and tieflings. NPC templates that use 11 int as a base include Archer, Knight, Martial Arts Adept, Master Thief, Scout, and War Priest. The ruling class for bugbears, lizard folk, and orcs are significantly smarter than their more common kin, showing that even though they are dumb brutes, they still respect intelligence and realize its importance to their survival. Several more species are listed here, including doppelgangers, duergar, imps, kurotoa, merfolk, unicorns, and even water weirds and zorn. Water weirds can be good or evil, and while good ones will try to scare people away instead of killing them, evil ones will trick their prey and use the environment to its advantage. It's interesting that Zorn are as smart as they are, since all they do is seek gemstones to eat and attack anyone that interferes. Maybe it uses its intelligence to seek out both of those things. The other two lycanthrope types, Werebear and Wererat, are here, but what makes them smarter than the other three? Well, that's easy. Werebears and Wererats are able to retain their intelligence enough in hybrid form to function in and expand their own societies, carefully choosing other creatures to spread lycanthropy to. Werewolves and wereboars are savage and indiscriminate about who they turn, and weretigers are too scared of making rivals to turn anybody. The higher intellect lycanthropes propagate their kind with careful cunning, and I think that right there might mark the biggest difference between 10 int and 11 int creatures. Carefully sought ambitions. This mentality would work for other 11 int creatures, like ghasts, steam mephits, vampire spawn, and especially imps. After all, anything higher than 10 int isn't necessary for an evolved species to survive in D&D's world, so anything higher than that will usually be reached because an individual or group of individuals actively sought greater knowledge. That or they had a more educated upbringing, likely as part of their culture. Intelligence 12. If 11 int is considered the human average, then anything above that is likely going to be considered genius level to the average human. That being said, gnomes, who get a +2 to int, would be considered geniuses even as commoners, and the Deep Gnome NPC reflects that value. NPC templates that use this as a base include druids and archdruids, nobles, and spies. Blue, bronze, red, and silver dragon wormlings are all born with greater intellect than average humans, and are as smart as adolescent black and brass dragons. Sahuagin, which many consider to be brutish savages, are actually brilliant military tacticians, and can function as convincing imposters in Sea Elf communities even at a young age. Azers are said to be legendary craftsmen capable of forging the most powerful magic weapons, but they don't even have any skill or tool proficiencies. What that tells me is that all of their 12 int is dedicated to crafting, and that it still takes them a really long time to do, but as a result they are incredibly dim-witted when it comes to anything else. Burr and sea hags are cunning creatures who twist deals to benefit themselves, but their intellect is less than that of other hags since they themselves are a bit more savage and depraved. They have less control over themselves. Cloud giants make a hobby out of watching and betting on the lives of humans, treating it like entertainment the way a human treats horses at a race. Dao, which have the least intelligence of all the genies, are still smarter than humans. Despite spending its life in the wilderness, mostly dormant and uneducated, Trents also have 12 int, though I believe this represents a capacity for problem solving and tactics rather than accumulated knowledge. Same goes to the satyr. A creature that becomes a Medusa becomes more intelligent by necessity, as its own reflection is something that it must always be paranoid of. Interestingly, there are two 12-int monsters that are brain-themed, the Grell and the Intellect Devourer. Grell have their own language, and even though their goals and methods are simple, they can employ very clever tactics when stalking their prey, even pretending to be friendly to a potential victim. Conversely, an Intellect Devourer has few tactics beyond just eating something's brain while it sleeps, but its capacity for intelligence is what's important here, as it gains all the knowledge of its host, but it doesn't necessarily know how to apply that knowledge. Luckily for it, its capacity is much greater than that of the normal humans they'd typically prey upon. Intelligence 13. The only NPC templates with 13 int as a base are assassins and priests, both professionals at what they do with higher educations. Interestingly, several drow-themed careers are on this list, like the Drow Priestess of Loth, Driders, Yoklos, and Dragloths. And Dragloths specifically are said to consider complicated tactics to be beneath them, so they're smart enough to realize that tactics are unnecessary when the majority of creatures can't lay a finger on them. Also interesting is that many 13-int creatures exist specifically to fool others, like Jack-o'-wares which pretend to be poor humans to gain others' trust, will-o'-wisps which lure their prey into dangerous remote places, the Barghest which pretends to be a goblin so it can assassinate them in secret, Rakshasas which usually pretend to be human nobles so they can get away with occasionally sneaking out and eating random townspeople, Cloakers which surprise their prey by pretending to be clothes, carpets, or stalactites, and of course, Anise and Green Hags. Most Gith NPCs have 13 int, probably a remnant of when they were Illithid slaves, and a necessity for their psychic abilities. It's worth noting that, adventure modules aside, out of all the 5e creatures that use intelligence for psionics, 13 is the lowest value for it. So that's probably a base for the ability to have psychic powers. With all of these cunning specimens, it's odd to see the Spectator here, a creature whose sole purpose is to be summoned to guard something. I guess its intelligence is supposed to help it maintain that task, but it also leads to them going mad from years of isolation. The smarter you are, the more likely insanity becomes. At least that's what tabletops teach us. Intelligence 14. NPC templates include the Apprentice Wizard, Bandit Captain, someone smart enough to organize raids for an entire clan of ruffians, and Swashbuckler, pirates who weave complex webs of deceit, personal gain, and evasion of law. As black and brass dragons reach adulthood, they become only as smart as adolescent dragons of blue, bronze, red, or silver color, which themselves are only as smart as the newly born copper, gold, and green wormlings. Them's some smart babies. Also, fairy dragons retain this level of intelligence for their entire lives, from birth to death, and they use it to play pranks on people. Hobgoblin warlords are genius tacticians at this stage, and dryads and sprites are able to ward off intruders through misdirection. Flumps gain this level of intelligence just by being around areas of strong psychic energies, but also by slowly absorbing people's unused thoughts. Deathlocks are undead warlocks who fail to serve their patrons in life and are forced to do so in death. They actually have proficiency in intelligence saves, arcana, and history, so they can use their great intellect specifically to research ways to further their patrons' purposes. This level of intellect is shared by almost every kind of Yuan-Ti, including Mind Whisperers, Nightmare Speakers, Pitmasters, and all 5 types of Malison. This makes sense, since all Yuan-Ti scheme to take over the world and become gods. They seldom feel emotion, and they don't love their gods, but they worship them anyway in exchange for power. I bet they feel like they're manipulating or trading with the gods. Confusingly, even though they're all the same creature, the autumn and summer forms of an Eladrin have 14 int, while the spring and winter forms have 18. These aren't separate entities. Any Eladrin can change form overnight, but why does its intellect change? None of its forms ever even have proficiency with any intelligence rolls, but all of their ability scores change with form, with the exception of Constitution. Winter uses intelligence for spellcasting, but spring doesn't. If I had to guess why they're designed like this, it's probably not that the Eladrin is gaining or losing knowledge when it transforms, but rather its capacity to use that knowledge is being affected by its mood. Its natural int is probably 18, but in its summer form, it's too stubborn to think any of its actions through, and in autumn form, it's so concerned about the well-being of others that it recklessly puts itself at risk. Intelligence 15. No NPC templates here. From this point forward, higher than average intellect becomes much more rare, as do the creatures that possess it. A Deathlock mastermind is even smarter than a regular Deathlock and is capable of concocting schemes and conspiracies capable of bringing down nations. Gauth are Beholderkin who interfere with rituals intending to summon beholders or spectators, pretending to be either so it can eat any magic items it's presented with. While a Cranium Rat has only 4 int by itself, a swarm of Cranium Rats can psychically link their intellects together like a hive mind and collectively possess 15 int, awakening psionic powers within them. Succubi must spend weeks or even months studying their next victim, learning how best to appeal to and tempt them. While smarter than the arrogant Dao, Jinni don't use their intellect for anything particularly ambitious or conniving. Instead, Jinni accumulate their knowledge through centuries of respectful conversation with their servants and visitors. They became smart through experience and socialization beyond what humans are normally capable of, though their intelligence is probably only used to remember the names and stories of people they've met or enslaved. Lastly, and most importantly, this level of intellect has a special guest. The first individual in the video, as well as the first deity, the No-Lord Yeenoghu. It's interesting to note that despite being the dumbest of the demon lords, its intelligence is still on par with the other creatures I just mentioned. While Yeenoghu craves only senseless destruction, he uses his intellect to maximize the suffering he causes. He might order his followers to destroy respected landmarks one at a time to demoralize a town's citizens before slaughtering them all, or have them chase down a caravan from a safe distance until they're too tired to flee anymore. He puts all of his above-average brain power into making his victims miserable and nothing else. Though he is telepathic, and he does know all languages, so there's that. Intelligence 16. There is only one NPC template with 16 int, the Illusionist, which has the misfortune of being the least intelligent of all the wizard NPCs, not counting the fledgling wizard apprentice. This is unusual to me, because you'd think an illusionist would need to be smart enough to create convincing illusions, which it certainly still is. I just think it should be more intelligent than, say, the Evoker, which all it does is blow things up. I think, though, that its intelligence is limited by the spellcaster level they wanted to represent with it, to keep it from having spells of a certain higher level, or to restrict it to being easier for a DM to play as a quick, ready-made illusion-casting ally or adversary. This is the intelligence level of adolescent copper, gold, and green dragons, adult blue, bronze, gold, red, and silver dragons, and ancient black and brass dragons. Andro or male sphinxes are high priests of the gods that created them and guardians of their treasures and secrets. This is reflected in their skill proficiencies. While they're only proficient in arcana for magical secrets, they actually have expertise in religion. Their knowledge of divine lore is so much vaster than just what their intelligence score represents. Guarding it is their entire reason for existing. The Afridi, being the second smartest kind of genie, are militaristic slavers who raid other planes and who are all master craftsmen. The Flame Skull is an undead spellcaster that uses wizard spells with only verbal components. It is bound to obey the commands of its creator, but once completed it gains free will and may even cease to be evil, as it does remember aspects of the time it spent alive. The Night Hag is the smartest of the Forgotten Realms hags, but it doesn't use its intelligence for spellcasting and has no proficiency with it. Instead, it uses its intellect to form webs of lies and conspiracies in order to maximize the suffering of those around it. Additionally, she spends time getting to know specific victims so she can figure out what to whisper to them in their dreams while trying to turn them evil and eventually steal their soul. Storm Giants live as far away from other creatures as possible, while still being able to watch the world as a whole. They are a prophetic race, able to predict when kingdoms will form or fall, and they have a +8 bonus to both Arcana and History. A very interesting creature is the Avatar of Death, which doesn't exist normally in the world and can only be conjured with a deck of many things. It has a 16 in every ability score, but because of the way it's designed, it doesn't get to use most of them. It may be a fabricated creature designed only to punish users of the deck, but then why does it have 16 int? Well, the Avatar doesn't go away until it or its summoner dies, and it needs to be able to outsmart them in case they decide to run and hide. It also gives it a buffer on intelligence saves to resist being fooled by illusions that might slow its pursuit. Intelligence 17. NPC templates include the Conjurer, Enchanter, Evoker, Necromancer, Transmuter, and the regular all-rounded Mage. So 17 seems to be the average intelligence of professional spellcasters. All of them are capable of speaking at least 4 languages. The Quintessent is an elderly storm giant, and while its intelligence proficiencies haven't increased at all, this extra point represents an entire lifetime's worth of knowledge gained. The Dusk Hags of Eberron are the smartest of all hags and are very prophetic, much like storm giants. They actually have visions of the future, and people of all kinds will readily make deadly deals in exchange for such knowledge. Beholders, while not spellcasters or prophets, use their vast intellect to fuel their rampant paranoia. They spend all their time gathering knowledge, recruiting minions, and designing its lair so it can prepare thousands of contingency plans for every possible outcome, to always be ready for any of its infinite hypothetical enemies. Their intelligence scores would probably be higher were they not completely insane. The Booyog is a goblin spellcaster that uses intelligence as its spellcasting ability and casts from the wizard's spell list, but it curiously does so using wild magic surges and is described as a sorcerer, implying this guy might be multiclassed. Devas are the weakest and most common type of angel, acting as agents and messengers of the divine. It doesn't have any intelligence proficiencies, so like the Storm Giant Quintessent, its score of 17 likely just represents a basic understanding of illusions and accumulated knowledge from having watched the world for so long. And then there's the true vampire. A normal vampire has no intelligence proficiencies, but a vampire spellcaster uses intelligence as its spellcasting ability, acting as a 9th level wizard, same as the Conjurer, Transmuter, and Enchanter. It's worth noting that 17 is the highest intelligence possible for a level 1 PC using the standard array or point buy methods, and only if they pick a race that gets a +2 bonus to int. Since level 1 PCs can be any age, this vast intellect can represent a naturally born gift or decades of academic study. Intelligence 18. NPC templates include the Abjurer and the Diviner, the last 2 specialized wizards. Both have access to 7th level spells, including Teleport. The Diviner, I can understand having this much intelligence because its whole thing revolves around divining information. But why the Abjurer? Well, having played an Abjuration wizard myself, I can tell you that a lot of strategy goes into playing one. I was the acting tank of my party, and proper utilization of my spell slots was a constant issue. Every spell had to both protect my party and restore HP to my arcane ward. Thanks to me, my level 2 party took down a chain devil without suffering any injury at all. Abjurers are magical defensive strategists, often employed to ward castles or even entire cities. This is the level of intellect shared by ancient dragons of blue, bronze, gold, red, and silver color. Blues and reds are empirical tyrants, bronzes are military tacticians, silvers are master impersonators, and golds are knowledgeable sages. Yet the adult copper and green dragons still have more intellect to gain. The smartest of the genies is the Marid. On top of being as haughty and self-important as the others, Marids value stories, legends, and lore far more than the others and considers deception to be an art. While charisma is the score used to convince someone that what you say is true, it takes an intelligent mind to weave such a story in the first place. Marids care about more than just what humans do. They're interested in everyone. They're master playwrights and consider themselves the world's best composers. Quaddles may not be angels, but they are celestials, guardians of good who look after the world from up close, in secret, rather than from a Deva's lofty interplanar perch. Ice Devils and Meriliths are military commanders in the Nine Hells and the Abyss, respectively, and Genosphinxes, like their male counterparts, are living libraries of forbidden knowledge with the added touch of guarding it through riddles. Those who cannot answer her riddles are killed without malice, for it is the price one pays for seeking knowledge when you yourself possess none. Baphomet, Prince of Beasts and God of Minotaurs, is a savage but a more intelligent one than Yeenoghu. He lives in a plane called the Endless Maze. He can cast the Maze spell, which he has a trait that makes him immune to called Labyrinthine Recall, and he can teleport once a day, just like the Abjurer and Diviner. Like Yeenoghu, he is telepathic and knows all languages, but he lacks any proficiency with intelligence. The most confusing creature of all to have a meager 18 int is the Aboleth. The Aboleth possesses all the memories of its ancestors, going back thousands of years to before the gods appeared, and they're able to absorb the memories of anyone they eat. But Aboleths are limited in their mobility, and most of the world's knowledge lies on the surface. Furthermore, it's not how much you know, but what you know. You might know the nutrition facts for over 10,000 food items, but that information isn't varied enough and has so few applications for it to matter. Aboleths know a lot, but what they know doesn't matter as much as creatures with higher intelligence. They know as much as Sphinxes do, but they're still susceptible to a CR2 Intellect Devourer. One more reason for them to be afraid of Mind Flayers. Speaking of which, Intelligence 19. Creatures with this much intelligence are immune to the mind-sapping effect of the Intellect Devourer. High Elf, Gith, Hobgoblin, and Tiefling PCs who roll an 18, or Gnome PC that rolls a 17 and puts it in intelligence, will have this much at level 1. Out of all the creatures on this list, none is more prevalent or iconic than the Mind Flayer. These powerful psionics come from the future, live in highly sophisticated colonies in which they share a hive mind, are all sages in their own right, they keep large farms of mind-controlled slaves, and their diet consists almost entirely of healthy brains, from which they also absorb memories. If the Aboleths only have 18 int because they're stuck in the water, the Mind Flayers represent how smart they could be if they were stuck underground. Mind Flayers don't get much smarter than they already are, not even after becoming an Alhun, a Mind Flayer Lich. However, Beholders who become Liches gain this level of intellect, as the desire to protect themselves evolves into a desire to take preemptive action against the world, becoming undead conquerors called Death Tyrants. The two demons with 19 int are the Nalfeshne, who uses his telepathy to issue orders to its minions as a genius military tactician, and the Glabrizu, who functions as an incredibly cunning and manipulative counterpart to imps, offering its service willingly to humans in order to tempt them into bringing about their own downfall through deceit. Geryon is the first archdevil we've seen and is therefore the least intelligent, but that's not saying much considering he's still as smart as a Mind Flayer. He and Zerial, who has 26 int, are considered by their peers to be the best military tacticians in the Nine Hells, with the possible exception of Asmodeus, despite such a huge gap in their intelligence. But it's obvious that Zerial must know much more than Geryon overall, but the amount of combat knowledge they possess must be roughly the same, which is why Geryon epitomizes combat, loving nothing more than to fight his enemies alongside his soldiers rather than actually try to win or conquer or seek greater ambitions. He is far from a warmonger, but he's smart enough to be the best warmonger there is. Planetars are the second tier of angels and paladins of the gods. They always know if they're being lied to, which has nothing to do with their insight, but that does mean the Planetar never has to doubt the information it's told. It knows that everything it hears is true, and that's more than can be said for genies. The Yuan-Ti Anathema, the strongest and smartest of all Yuan-Ti, will rule several cities over the course of its immortal life, seeking ever greater power and knowledge with the ultimate goal of divinity. The Drow Arachnomancer is a 16th level spellcaster, but she doesn't use int as her spellcasting ability. Rather, this level of int is gained from knowledge gathered by countless spiders from around the world, and it shows in her proficiency in arcana and nature. Lastly, the Marut is an inevitable, a line of constructs built specifically to maintain order in the multiverse. Maroots specifically are contract enforcers. They read a contract between two parties, and if either breaks the terms, it hunts them down and kills them. It knows all languages, can detect if a contract contains logical inconsistencies or vagueness, has a plus 12 bonus to intelligence saves so illusions will pretty much never fool it, and can navigate the multiverse by itself, plane shifting at will. It's like the Terminator of D&D. Intelligence 20. 20. 20 is as high as any mortal's ability score can go. Only magic can raise it higher, such as with the Tome of Clear Thought. Only a gnome can achieve 20 int at level 1, and only if it rolls an 18 and puts it there. The only human on this list is the NPC template for the Archmage, an 18th level spellcaster with the ability to speak 6 languages and stop time. This is also the final stop for ancient copper and green dragons, masters of the verbal craft and smartest of all dragons. 3 types of lich are here, including the regular lich, the demi-lich, and the Elitha lich, which is another kind of mind flayer lich. All 3 are former archmages, so 20 int is a prerequisite for their current forms. Morkoths are powerful, space-traveling hypnotists who collect everything they possibly can as the multiverse's most cunning hoarders. They can catch spells aimed at them with their minds and redirect them to others. It automatically knows when someone enters its lair and where they are at all times, and it's an int-based spellcaster with access to many divination spells, plus spells that are useful for getting around and gathering items. It knows the name and location of everything it has ever owned, remembers the details of every deal it's ever made, and can track thieves with perfect precision. Balors, the strongest of the standard demon in 5e's monster manual, are generals in the Abyss. While their unbridled rage probably makes them slightly less effective combat tacticians than Geryon, Balors care more about winning the war than he does, so their tactics extend beyond just fighting within their home planes. They can see opportunity in using other planes to their advantage. Several demon lords are on this list too, including Demogorgon, Dweeblex, Orcus, and Zugtmoy. With Demogorgon, take the paranoia of the beholders, that everything is out to get him, crank it up to 11, and combine it with an overwhelming desire to destroy the source of that paranoia, that being everything. Demogorgon is completely mad, but he still possesses enough intellect to successfully seek ways to ruin the multiverse, including the creation of several monstrosities, like Chimerae and Murrow. Orcus is the Prince of Undeath, patron of necromancers and creator of ghouls. He's gained a large following using an oddly lawful system of rewarding his cultists with power whenever they spread his influence, or rather, when they spread death. Like archmages, he can also stop time. Dweeblex, the god of slime and oozes, uses its intellect for one thing only: to dissolve and consume absolutely everything. It's smart enough to concoct plans, reward its followers, and form alien opinions on various creatures, but all of its brainpower is devoted to eating the world and disintegrating the cosmos. Dweeblex's rival, Zugtmoy, is the queen of fungi and his opposite in many ways. Rather than destroy everything with decay, Zugtmoy seeks to rule it by infecting everything with spores. Her followers are mind-controlled by microscopic parasites, and Zugtmoy's ambitions rely on subterfuge and secrecy. Intelligence 21. Now we get to godlike levels of intelligence, the kind that only the luckiest and most powerful mortals could ever hope to possess. The most intelligent and powerful figures in Mind Flayer society are the rarely born Eulitherids, and the Elder Brains that they will one day become. Elder Brains are what allow a Mind Flayer colony to have a hive mind, and it propagates the birth of new Mind Flayer tadpoles. They are able to tell when one of the tadpoles will spawn a Eulitherid, and may help it grow into a powerful leader. When the Eulitherid gets bored of sharing its authority with the Elder Brain that raised it, it will strike out and form its own colony. The Eulitherid has a host of mind control psionics at its disposal, and both it and the Elder Brain can plane shift once a day. They can also maintain a telepathic connection across any distance. The Molidius is a demon even more powerful than the Balor and can polymorph and teleport at will. They're more than just generals. They're the direct spokespersons of the Demon Lords. Demon Lords can communicate with and through them anywhere at all. So since a Molidius never has the opportunity to even consider betraying its master, it is an extension of its master's will. Knowledge normally reserved for gods is freely given to them, so much so that Molidii may as well be demon lords themselves. If their masters were to ever perish, a Molidius might be most qualified to replace them. Empyreans are titanic children of the gods, overly emotional and capable of powerful, world-shattering magic, and the ability to plane shift once per day. They're so naive and arrogant that even though they can be killed, they refuse to believe it. I think their 21 int is made possible due to a divine upbringing and an extensive knowledge of the planes. You'd be pretty smart too if your mother was the literal goddess of knowledge, but Empyreans don't strike me as the type who'd push themselves academically. 2 archdevils, Baal and Moloch, are on this list. Baal has no particularly nefarious ulterior motives. His one and only drive is to conquer in the name of his archduke, Memnon, and to rise in the hierarchy in a fair way. He is in complete control of his emotions and is legitimately loyal to Memnon. He is considered a genius tactician who actually spares his enemies in order to make servants out of them, rather than ruthlessly slaughtering everyone. But even with 21 int, he finds politics confusing, and they get in the way of his promotions, so he recruits more politically savvy mortals to act on his behalf. This is proof that even creatures with godlike intelligence can have an Achilles heel when all their focus is on one subject. Moloch's story isn't as noble. He is a former archdevil, tricked by his night hag advisor into turning against Asmodeus. Moloch was exiled and cursed to assume the form of an imp anytime he enters the Nine Hells. Now he schemes and raises armies on other planes, trying to find a way to reclaim his status. Don't forget that wisdom is the score for insight, so it makes sense that he could be fooled by a creature with much less intellect. But for beings like archdevils, who spend all their time scheming, who know all languages and have been around for millennia, their intelligence scores are a logical byproduct. Intelligence 22. Like aboleths and mind flayers, the ooze like oblexes are able to consume people and gain their memories. An elder oblex is able to create carbon copies of the people it has eaten, capable of impersonating multiple people at once with perfect acting. It possesses the knowledge of dozens, possibly even hundreds of people, and it specifically targets the smartest creatures. They don't have any ambitions. They prey on memories because it's their sole source of nourishment. But an Elder Oblex is still smarter than the mind flayers that created it. They have proficiency in intelligence saves and every int-based skill except investigation. They use intelligence as their spellcasting ability, and they can cast Charm Person at 5th level at will. Krakens are living weapons created by the gods when they first appeared and used in the Dawn War. When it was over, Krakens freed themselves from servitude and swore eternal vengeance on the gods. They know all the languages of their creators, plus Primordial, and even though they can't speak, they don't need to since they have telepathy. A Kraken's sole goal in its millennia-long existence is to kill the gods that made it, and it schemes forever to that effect, forming cults and armies that it uses to further its devices. Their memory is as long as an aboleth's, but with the addition of divine knowledge. Pit Fiends are the personal attendees of the Archdevils. Though they look no more sophisticated than a Balor, they are cunning, manipulative, and aristocratic, able to navigate the most complex of otherworldly politics. They are the nobles of hell, but remain plagued with an arrogance that makes them seek out the strongest enemies. Intelligence 23. Gratz, the Dark Prince of Pleasure, is incredibly hedonistic. His lifestyle is vastly different from other lords, preferring to take on a handsome appearance, live in a fancy mansion, and surround himself with beautiful creatures and objects. His favorite pastime is causing, and then watching, self-important creatures slowly lose everything they value. He uses his godlike intellect to live like a noble and indulge himself however he pleases, using charm and manipulation to always get what he wants. That being said, his intelligence is incidental, as he doesn't possess any proficiencies with it. Like Baal, Hutijin is fiercely loyal to his master, Mephistopheles. But instead of fighting on his behalf, which he is perfectly capable of doing, Hutijin specializes in politics and the unraveling of conspiracies against his master. He hates being away from his master so much that he kills anyone responsible for separating them. All of Hutijin's brainpower goes into politics and intrigue, nothing else. Gratz and Hutijin aren't interested in wanton destruction. But imagine what something with their intellect could do if they were. The 13 Nagpas have survived for centuries, thanks entirely to the perpetual webs of lies, conspiracies, and false trails that lead their enemies away. Nagpas are cursed with the inability to learn from that which is alive, fresh, or whole, so they seek to destroy absolutely everything, so they can plunder books and magic items from the wreckage. They can cast intelligence-based spells up to 8th level, mostly mind control spells, and it has the ability to try charming someone as a bonus action. So it can attempt to do so every turn until it's used it on every creature it can see. Intelligence 24. These levels of intelligence are becoming rarer and rarer now. Titivolis, while only second in command of the plane of Diz, is technically its acting ruler. With his incredible charisma, he manipulated his way into his position, then terrified Despater into hiding in his palace from his phantom usurpers. Titivolis maintains his position through a mastery of politics, even hiring secret agents to spread rumors about himself. He doesn't have any intelligence proficiencies. He uses all of his intellect for politics. Archdevil was right. Intelligence 25. Solars, strongest of all angels, possess all the same powers as Planetars, including the ability to know lies when it hears them. They have a plus 14 to intelligence saves, so virtually no illusions are going to fool these guys. They are the stewards of the gods, having a closer relationship with them than any other non-deities, and are able to both concoct and enact plans to defend their entire multiverse. Intelligence 26. Zariel was once a Solar herself, so it makes sense she'd be at least as smart as one. When she fell to the corruption of hell and became an archdevil, she was imbued with the kind of knowledge only one of them would have. She has a plus 16 to int saves, makes deals with the cunning of a night hag, manages an entire plane's armies as well as all of its newcomers and visitors, and all the while is secretly plotting to overthrow Asmodeus. Zariel is the smartest Archduchess in the Nine Hells. Now, Tiamat, the goddess of evil dragons, used to rule Avernus in place of Zariel, but she proved incompetent in doing so and was demoted almost immediately. She's not proficient in int saves, but she is in Arcana and Religion. Tiamat's equal intelligence isn't focused on any of what Zariel is capable of. Instead, she focuses her efforts outside of the Nine Hells. She never leaves her lair, instead preferring to let avatars and cultists spread her will and influence. All the evil dragons in the world worship her without question, plus several other draconic races like kobolds. Her ultimate goal is to take over the multiverse, and her methods are labyrinthine and unknowable. Fraz Erblu, Demon Lord of Illusion and Prince of Deception, doesn't even have max charisma. He may have a plus 15 to int saves, but after that, all of his brain power goes into lying. Most of his cultists don't even realize they're worshipping him, because he has several aliases of other gods, some good, some evil. He uses these ruses to turn his followers against his adversaries, the other demon lords, and sometimes gets so engrossed in a role, he starts to believe it himself. He can create incredibly realistic illusory planes too. Intelligence 27. Acererak, the lich responsible for creating the Tomb of Horrors, is a plane-hopping madman who builds stereotypical dungeons full of traps and treasure specifically to lure in adventurers, whose souls he devours to maintain his immortality. He puts all of his effort into toying with adventurers, and unlike Vecna, he has no desire to become a god. No greater ambition other than to be an in-world, old-school dungeon master for all eternity. He's practically Gary Gygax's self-insert OC. He has proficiency in int saves, arcana, and history. He's a max-level wizard with access to spells like Power Word Kill, Time Stop, Teleport, and Plane Shift, and he has an infinite number of first, second, and third level spell slots, so he can shield, counterspell, and animate dead as much as he wants. He also has True Sight and can speak 9 languages. Intelligence 28 and 29. Unfortunately, as of my writing this, no 5e creatures have been made yet with either of these intelligence scores. We can probably guess what they represent though, which we'll cover after we discuss Intelligence 30. Max Int. We are no longer in the realm of god-like intelligence. This is the intelligence of a god. Interestingly, neither of 5e's 2 max intelligence creatures are gods, although they are damn close. The first is Eberron's Sul-Khatesh, Keeper of Secrets and Queen of Shadows. With a plus 18 to int saves, arcana, history, and religion, it's almost impossible for her to fail a DC 20 check for any of them. She has True Sight, knows all languages, and has telepathy up to 150 feet rather than the usual 120. Int is her spellcasting ability, and she can cast Counterspell, Fireball, Lightning Bolt, and Shield at will, as well as cast Power Word Kill and Teleport once a day. She can also polymorph at will, has advantage on concentration checks, can cause other spellcasters to lose concentration, and can blow up other people's spell slots. She can also just create magical meteors, whose craters create anti-magic fields. She is an insanely powerful spellcaster. Now, I wasn't going to include any Magic the Gathering creatures in this video, but this one stood out to me. Niv Mizzet is an ancient red dragon, I think? He doesn't have as many int proficiencies as Sul-Khatesh, but he is a max level wizard, and similar to Acererak, he effectively has infinite spell slots of 1st through 3rd level. He can also concentrate on 2 spells simultaneously, has advantage on concentration checks, and can change the damage types of his spells. Now, he doesn't have True Sight, doesn't have telepathy, and can only speak 2 languages, so he doesn't really seem like he'd be on par with Sul-Khatesh, right? Well, Sul puts all of her intellect into manipulating mortals from the shadows. Her spellcasting prowess is innate. Niv Mizzet is an accomplished scholar who studied his way to the level of power he possesses, and probably thought learning languages was a waste of time when you can just use a scroll or a helm of comprehend languages whenever it comes up. He can also keep track of an infinite number of underlings, coordinate an infinite number of projects, all the while maintaining his studies and running a world-renowned guild hall. These 2 individuals both gained and used their intellect in different ways, but they share the similarity of having int-based spellcasting, one innate, one learned. Another thing shared by these higher intellect creatures is their ability to keep track of all the things going on in their lives. In a way, you might even say they're as smart as varying levels of dungeon masters. After all, no creature in D&D can be smarter than the human playing it, and DMs are the real gods of D&D. So, in summary, 30 int represents a top-tier spellcaster with extra abilities that improve its spellcasting, as well as a keen ability to keep track of and manipulate everything it's ever been involved in. It represents a dungeon master who knows all the spells in the game and never forgets what names or traits they gave to their NPCs. 29 int is the same as 30, except replace everything with most things. These creatures aren't perfect, and a detail or 2 slips past sometimes. 28 int is the same as 29, just instead of most things, it's a lot of things. We're basically equating these creatures to DMs who are differently capable of keeping track of everything in their games. 27 int is the same as 28, with a notable specification that these creatures are unable to foresee the success of their enemies, specifically the PCs, because their brilliance blinds them to their own failures, and they can't know what real-world human players are thinking. 26 int creatures are capable of tracking and manipulating an entire universe's worth of people and events, while higher intellect creatures can track that of multiple planes. 25 int creatures can track many of the events that occur in multiple planes at once, but not all of them. 24 int creatures can track and manipulate all the events of one plane. 23 int creatures can only track things that immediately matter to them, and are masters at manipulating all of it. 22 int creatures possess ancient and forgotten lore, the knowledge of at least dozens of intelligent creatures combined. 21 int creatures happened upon or were given ancient secrets and divine knowledge over the course of many years, but have little intent of learning more. 20 int is the normal maximum for mortals. These creatures include high-level wizards with 9th level spells, creatures that can manipulate magic beyond simple casting, master tacticians, and interplanar opportunists. 19 int represents a huge amount of knowledge gathered from all over the creature's current plane, with 1 or 2 forbidden secrets from beyond. They are genius tacticians, not masters per se, and powerful scions. 18 int creatures are professional tacticians. They're actually hired to do just that, master storytellers, and possess a large amount of forgotten knowledge that most people don't know about. 17 int creatures are professional mages, accurate prophets, or have been around long enough to learn more secrets than anyone else. 16 int is the minimum needed to be considered a professional spellcaster and is the score most level 1 wizard PCs will start with. It also represents master craftsmen, or creatures whose limited knowledge consists entirely of divine secrets. Most creatures of this intellect or higher are able to discern illusions with ease. 15 int creatures are able to expertly manipulate one creature at a time, gain their knowledge by interacting with others over the course of an immortal life, and is the lowest int for any known deity, so you consider it a minimum. 14 int appears to be the minimum for wizard students. It represents standard tacticians, researchers, and ambitious schemers. 13 int creatures include weaker scions, those that have 1 or more false identities, and higher educated commoners. 12 int is the average for gnome commoners. These creatures can maintain 1 false identity but not for long, and their tactics and skills are more sophisticated than most. Creatures with 12 int can even be the best at what they do in the whole multiverse if it's literally all they know. 11 int is the average for human commoners. They can function in their own societies and approach their goals with tact. 10 int is the average for commoners of most races that aren't humans or gnomes. It tends to be the intelligence of creatures that live in civilized society, but don't have access to or interest in standard education, or creatures that don't live in civilized society, but have been around long enough to learn things on their own. 9 int creatures cannot solve complex problems, but they're smart enough to have unique personalities and ambitions. 8 int is the lowest for standard humanoids. Anything lower would be considered mentally deficient. Most of these creatures are savages that live in secluded societies without access to educational materials, but rather share their knowledge with one another. 7 int creatures are dim-witted savages that focus their minds on one course of action, whether it's combat, survival, or pretending to live in high society. 6 int is the maximum for anything considered a normal animal. They usually just do what they're told or what they feel like doing, and some of them form packs. 5 int is the minimum for good aligned creatures. You need to be at least this smart to discern between right and wrong. It's also the minimum for possessing a sense of humor. Most of these creatures just wander around doing as they please, or follow simple instructions from smarter enforcers. This is also the lowest int we see where knowing all languages is possible, but without any capacity to communicate. 4 int is the minimum for sapience or self-awareness. It's also the lowest intelligence level where any meaningful communication is possible. 3 int is the lowest a legal PC's int can be at character creation. It represents smarter mammals and creatures that can understand and obey verbal commands. It is the minimum int required to be considered sentient by the game's rules. 2 int creatures lack the ability to communicate at all and typically act on pure instinct. You can communicate with them and even control them telepathically, but their actions, responses, and range of emotion are incredibly limited. 1 int creatures lack standard emotions, and the ones that can actually think only follow their instincts, and 0 int is for inanimate objects, corpses, and completely brain-dead creatures incapable of thought or reaction to stimuli. There. That's it. That is all the information that my research on intelligence was able to provide. So, having done all of that, how much intelligence should Ornstein have? Well, the PDF that I showed you earlier gave him only 12 intelligence, but I think he should have 18. It represents an incredibly professional tactician, one who would be sought out specifically for that, and he basically lives in the City of the Gods, so he would have access to a lot of forbidden and divine information. So there you go. It's one of the reasons I'm not going to be using that PDF. Well, I hope you were able to get something useful out of this video. Those of you who are making custom NPCs can now more easily decide which level of intelligence your creatures should have. And I know it's going to make my life easier. I don't know whether or not I'm going to do videos on the other ability scores because for some reason intelligence ended up being the easiest to research of the 6. But if you really want me to, I will give it a try. If you like this video, be sure to leave a like, leave a comment, and subscribe. Until next time, I'll be here in the darkness, quietly awaiting your return.